70 years ago, 500 young Scots risked their lives by volunteering to fight in another country's war. This remarkable group of men threw themselves headfirst into the bloody struggle against fascism. A third never returned. They were the Scots who fought Franco. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 was a conflict that gripped Scotland. It was the defining moment for a generation of Scots and, for a time, the country's greatest cause. Proportionately, Scots made a greater contribution than any other nationality. Now, through a series of interviews gathered over a decade and never before seen, their story can be told. It is a tale of hope, humour, fear, and horror.
The words of the immortal bard come into my mind. Man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands mourn. And I decided at that time, at least I should try and make an effort of some kind to help the peoples of Spain.
I'm quite pleased I went. I mean, I thought it was something that should have been done, you know.
If I leave this earth tomorrow, I leave with the sense of knowing that I've done something on behalf of my class, on behalf of my kind.
I believe in violence. I mean, if you don't believe in violence, you don't go to war.
And one day, when I came home from school, my mother says to me, George, Dad won't be coming home. You're now the man of the family. Christ, I was 12 years old.
The 2008 death of the last Scot to have fought in Spain, Steve Fullerton, has served as a catalyst for interest in this extraordinary episode. Grandchildren of the hungry 30s have begun to look back and renew the memory of a time when Scots felt they could change not only Scotland, but the rest of the world too. Archivist Daniel Gray is the author of Homage to Caledonia, a major new book on the part Scotland played in the Spanish Civil War. He has been astounded by the book's success and the level of interest Scots have in the conflict.
I think certainly the book has brought a success in the fact that people are now talking about it more than before. I've had a lot of relatives of people who had granddad, friend, uncle, auntie in Spain come to me and want to talk about it. When I've gone around doing talks, the attendances have been massive. And I feel that slowly but surely with the work of other people, and the book's played a small part in it, Scotland's beginning to finally recognise this incredibly large role that its people played in this far, far away war.
Viva la Quinta Brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Viva la...
Writer Chris Dolan has long been fascinated by the Spanish Civil War.
Que nos cubrirá de glorias.
I think there's something absolutely crucial. That whole, the obvious coming together, or the battle between 4 or 5, not just 2, but 4 or 5 big philosophies in life, between democracy, communism, anarchism, and all kind of areas in between. So I think there's something happening in Spain which really is going to dictate the next century to us.
The war in Spain began when General Francisco Franco led a military rebellion against the Republican government in July 1936. Franco's fascist side was supported by an alliance of military leaders, monarchists, conservatives, and most of the Catholic Church. They received crucial military assistance from Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. Ranged against them was a Republican government coalition of socialists, communists, and anarchists. In addition, the Republicans received arms from Stalin's Soviet Union and were boosted by the 35,000 foreign nationals who flocked into Spain to form the International Brigades, a volunteer army. 549 of those volunteers came from Scotland. Not only was their decision to go to Spain brave, it was also illegal. At the start of the war, the British government signed up to a non-intervention agreement, outlawing participation in Spain's war and banning the sale of arms to the country. the Scotland those men left behind was far removed from the Scotland of today. It was a time of regular strike action, incendiary street preachers, and a belief in great causes. Scotland stood out in Europe as both one of its poorest countries and one of its most radical.
Scotland is where the Labour Party is born. You know, the International Labour Party, I mean, a lot of those great movements, including strands of anarchism, of communism, of socialism, had real roots in Scotland and all over Scotland, in Fife and in the north and in Glasgow. So I kind of think that Scotland, in a sense, was already politically, psychologically set up. Then along comes the Great Depression, the rise of fascism in Germany, and I think the Scottish working class really just take that on and realise there's a war here that has to be fought. And if it has to be fought in foreign soil, then so be it. Although interestingly, it's not just working class industrial men and women that go. Farmers go, middle class people go, upper class people go. So again, I think that tells you something about the state of Scotland politically and psychologically in the 1930s. I mean, the Spanish Civil War is fascinating, but so was Scotland in the 1930s, an extraordinary place.
The example of the Spanish Civil War was no different. A quarter of British participants in Spain left from Scotland at a time when the country made up just 9% of the UK population. The Scots who fought Franco were often veterans of political actions here. They saw Spain as an extension of homegrown campaigns.
Here in Aberdeen, our basic industries were it was the shipbuilding industry, the farming community, and the fishing industry. Those are the three things that we depend on. And this has been slowly eroded away. The effect, of course, was mass unemployment taking place, even within Aberdeen. It happened in every city up and down the country for different reasons. And the question of no work, poor homes, even the money they got from the brew at that particular time was so little, it hardly kept the body and soul together, as it were. And all these pressures that started building up in the people. But the two big things that happened was the general strike in 1926 and the Spanish Civil War. These were the two big items that actually happened within the labour movement.
"70 years ago, more than 500 young Scots radicals volunteered to serve in the Spanish Civil War.
In many ways, the Spanish Civil War was the climax of a whole series of issues in Scotland from the late 1920s onwards. So, for example, we could start with the general strike of 1926, to mass unemployment, to the hunger marches, to the means test, and to the activity of the British Union fascist Oswald Mosley in Scotland and the public meetings that he held north of the border.
Resistance to domestic fascism in the form of the British Union of Fascists was widespread in Scotland and formed a vital part of the political landscape that led to involvement in Spain.
They had a very proud record, the unemployed workers movement and activists then, of making sure that a fascist meeting had never actually lasted more than a few minutes. They had a very good intelligence network. They in fact had recruited and talked with the tram workers. So they were able to find information at very short notice if a fascist meeting was taking place. And they used to just ride on the trams for free and get up there and simply go in and put the boot in. They also, of course, had the proud record that the National Policy Director of the British Union of Fascists, when they were on their UK tour, admitted in a report that the toughest town that they were ever in was actually Aberdeen.
Wherever the British fascists rallied or marched, a mass Scottish anti-fascist resistance mobilised. That same resistance would not let mere national borders obstruct it from its work. Aberdonian railway worker John Longdragon was one of those who exported the fight from Scotland to Spain.
By myself, I went for political reasons. I had fought fascism in the street here in Aberdeen, and Glasgow for that matter at that particular time, and I was conscious of the fact of what fascism would do if they ever came to power. Now, it's one thing to fight them in the streets here, but to be really true to yourself, to believe in what you actually believe in as an anti-fascist, you have to follow it up. You couldn't say, well, I'll fight fascism here in Aberdeen, but I won't fight it anywhere else. I'd given up the ghost. That's ridiculous. You can't have that argument. You must follow up if you actually believe in it. And this is what I believed in.
To those that volunteered to go to Spain, it didn't matter whether fascism cropped up in Buckhaven or Barcelona. The point was to oppose it. They were motivated too by the idea that were fascism not nipped in the bud in Spain, the inevitable result would be a wider European war, as the popular slogan went, "Bombs on Madrid today means bombs on Glasgow tomorrow." They believed only by stopping Franco, Hitler and Mussolini in Spain could a world war be prevented. Many of those who would go on to fight there were members of the National Unemployed Workers Movement and took part in its hunger marches to London. Jenny Renton runs a bookshop in Edinburgh. Her father Donald was a key figure in the Spanish Civil War. She remembers politics as being the central motivation in his life.
Princess Diana once said that there were 3 people in her marriage, and that was absolutely the same for my mother. There was her, and there was him, and then there were politics. The politics meant that the politics was really the first lady of my father's life. Politics was why my father wasn't around much when I was a child. Politics was why he went to Spain and she was left here, not knowing when he was in prison whether he was alive or dead. And politics was the reason why, in his absence, I was given the myth was constantly being reinforced of how great a man he was, which in fact, you know, I know he did have some greatness in him, and I still somehow really subscribe to that myth.
For trainee accountant John Dunlop, political motivations for volunteering were accompanied by ethical ones.
I was excited naturally by the stories reading about the International Brigade in Spain, and I decided that it really was my duty to go. And so I was brought up with a strong Presbyterian conscience, and I had, you know, these ideas of duty and responsibility sort of inbred in me. So I decided to join, and I was accepted, and to me it was the most wonderful experience of my life.
George Gowans of Cumnock was stirred to act by his sense of injustice.
My first introduction to Spain was in the mess room. I was in the post office, and in the mess room there's always plenty of papers lying around, and I picked up this Daily Worker. Believe it or not, I'd never heard of it before. And I read of how non-intervention was going to take place between Britain and France. And to me, it seemed against all international law that Spain should be deprived of food, clothing, or whatever necessary by 2 major powers. And I thought to myself, well, I can speak a bit of Esperanto. I could probably be of some assistance, supposing it was even as an interpreter. So I thought I would take myself off to Spain.
These motivations were often accompanied by an understandable sense of adventure, as writer Chris Dolan explains.
Because as well as all the politics, as well as and the influence of the Communist Party in particular in Scotland in the 1930s, what an adventure. You know, if I were an unemployed young working man in Scotland in 1936, what an opportunity to go to Spain and to fight against the greatest evil of all, but to have this, you know, camaraderie of going on a bus, going to London, seeing Paris, travelling with your mates to Spain, drinking Spanish wine, meeting Spanish senoritas. I mean, there must have been all of that, and good on them. Why shouldn't there be? Why shouldn't there be that sense of adventure? But it was undoubtedly coupled entirely with a real sense of political purpose.
Whatever their motivations for taking the radical step of going to Spain, Scottish volunteers faced a perilous journey to get there. John Dunlop ran into obstacles from the outset.
We decided we were going to go off on the 30th of May on get the 5 o'clock train from Glasgow to London. And so I told this old chap, you know, I've been friendly with in the office, I said, I told him actually on the afternoon, I said, well, cheerio, WB. He said, you might not be seeing me again. I said, because I'm going off to Spain to join the International Brigade. And he said, are you sure? And he was a bit worried, very worried about it. So, and I pushed off early from the office, you see, and to get ready to go. And he was so worried, and he phoned up my Uncle Norman, and Norman phoned up my father in Edinburgh, and deputation went to try and head me off at the station, but unfortunately they went an hour too late. They went to the train after I'd gone. So I never saw the deputation. Didn't know there was the reaction till after I got to Spain.
Early on in the conflict, Scots travelled to Spain as individuals or in small groups, an act of daring heightened by the fact that so few of them had left Scotland before.
The working class people didn't go abroad in these particular times. We couldn't afford these sort of things at all. It was only the students and people like that. So a number of these students who were in France when the war broke out in Spain, they crossed the border and went into Spain and joined little militia bands at that particular time. They weren't formed as a NID group, as an international brigade or anything like that. That came, as I say, in about January 1937.
From the winter of 1936, volunteers were channelled through the Communist Party's Glasgow office and dispatched to London by train or bus.
First, we left Glasgow on Thursday night, arrived in London on Friday morning. Friday night we left on a weekend ticket to Paris at 28 and sixpence. Return Friday night to Tuesday morning. But of course, naturally, we never used the return.
Well, as I say, we went. The three of us from Dundee went to Glasgow, and there was a group there, and we went out to London. I don't remember who we met, but they asked, does anybody here speak French? Nobody. I said, well, I had it at school. I said, you'll do. And I was handed a packet of 10 cigarettes. Now, give this to somebody over when you go to Paris. So we got a weekend ticket. It was the longest weekend of my life. But we got this weekend ticket to go to Paris, and we were aboard the ship. It was a French ship that come over the Tannoy, that all those without passports report to the purser's office. So I got these two Dundee lads, and I says, come on, we'll go up right away. So we went in, and this lad, he says, you going to Paris? I said, yes. He says, why? I said, well, we just finished our exams. I was carrying on, I was a student and such like. I could have passed for one at that time.
Mike Arnott succeeded Tom Clark as Secretary of the Dundee Trades Council and recalls how his friend's journey into France was marred by an untimely nicotine craving.
He was given a packet of cigarettes to pass to his contact in Paris when he arrived, and he smoked one of the cigarettes on the ferry, and when he got to Paris he was absolutely traumatised to find out that the cigarette he smoked out of the packet was the one with the secret message on for his contact.
The weekend was called a dirty weekend because it was a weekend for people who had money in that to go to Paris. They went to Paris on a Saturday and they come back again on the Monday. This was the weekend. It was always called a dirty weekend for obvious reasons. And so we went across on the same basis, but only it wasn't a dirty weekend, not that sort of dirty weekend anyhow. And we arrived in France and we got up to Paris. And when we arrived in Paris, I was in charge of a group of about 8 people when we arrived there. And we got lost.
We were taken by bus from Paris to this, I think it's Crete or Certi, a name something like that in France, to a small holding. And there we were given a good plate of broth and a pair of sandals made of rope sandals. Very, very good indeed. They were non-skiddable. You could climb without any trouble with them on. And we were told to keep very, very quiet. And then when it got dark at night, we set off over the Pyrenees.
From the farm we went on a bus to the foothills of the Pyrenees. And from there it was slog over the Pyrenees and hope for the best, and that was it.
Every time we'd come to the top of a hill or part of a mountain, and we're saying we're about there was always another one in front of us all the time, you know, and it was the most depressing sort of thing to see another one in front of you. But about 6 o'clock in the morning, I always remember it, the sun was coming up behind us there, and we reached the top of the hill, and we're looking down into a valley, and the sun was shining straight down, and there's a white farmhouse, and that's for Spain, you know, and the tremendous relief, you know, little things like that stay in your mind, just little incidents that stay in your mind there.
I was scared plenty of times in Spain when it came to action, but we were in very much what they call a high nowadays. So, in fact, I was one of as soon as we could see the top of the pass, the road, there was a race to get there, and I was about third. The top was over the top, and and it went down a steep incline on the other side, and we got down into it was like a little chapel that was on the hillside there, where they had big 10-gallon drums of coffee ready for us, and fresh bread. And while we were there, the Germans started singing the International, and everybody joined in their own language. And really, it was the most inspiring moment of my life to hear men from all over Europe, and some from America too among us, singing this song of the oppressed people of all nations. It was, I think, probably the most inspiring moment of my life.
From 1936 until 1939, hundreds of Scots fought in the Spanish Civil War. On arrival in Spain, the gravity of the situation they had committed themselves to hit home.
No matter how committed you may be politically or anything else, it's still a part adventure. You understand? You reach this point, adventure. But now you're looking down in Spain, and the change that's taking place then is, what am I heading for? What am I going into? We don't know what war is. We never experienced war. So I did 4 years as a territorial soldier, just for the sake of getting to summer camp and away from the slums, away from the town and so forth. Nevertheless, I had no experience of war. So this was something new. Now, the feelings started coming in. Not a doubt, not a question of doubt of that, but just a little uncertainty. That's what we're heading for.
With their treacherous journey made, once in Spain, the volunteers were sent for basic training. Any exuberance and excitement soon gave way to horror and alarm as the harsh reality of war set in. The watershed moment for John Longdrigan came while he passed through Barcelona on a train.
From Guerra, we proceeded down towards Albacete, which is the International Brigade base, the 15th International Brigade base. But in the process of going down there, we stopped at Barcelona, passing for about half an hour. And this was our first taste of war, because an air raid was in progress at the time. And it was the first time we'd actually seen bodies, men, women, and children, I expect, spread all over the street and so forth, and the rubble of houses coming down. So something we would also experience later on in the Second World War. But at this particular time, it was something completely new. The bombing of civilians, the civilian population, using them as part of the target, the war target and that. And we were shocked to see such a thing happening there.
Well, we went to a place called Madrigueras, where there were French and Germans there, and and the British. We were in different parts of the village, but we used to meet up for parades and for football particularly. There were some keen footballers among us.
Discipline's a great thing, an organisation. When we went there and the battalion was formed, it was a sort of ragtag. I'd been in the 58th Cameronians, West Princess Street, so a wee bit of experience, but the rest had never handled a gun or handled a weapon, and it was just sort of like a crowd of corner boys and like, forming a team, and there was we hadn't time to do anything and get organised. It was a sort of just a crowd. It wasn't an organised football team, it was just like 11 men who had never played before and just all together.
When we arrived in Figueres, this little major I was telling you about, the first thing he said to us was, whatever your political opinions are or anything, forget them. We don't want them here. Doesn't matter what you are, communist, Labour, what you are, forget about it altogether. There's only one thing you have to be here, anti-fascist. You sign on as an anti-fascist soldier. This is what you do. And this is what we had to do. And he also given the opportunity. Anybody who wants to change their mind now's the time to do it. There's always time to back out and go back out again, if they want to. But this time they wouldn't have to climb the mountains, they could go through the border. But nobody went back, as far as I know of, nobody went back.
Daniel Gray works at the National Library of Scotland. Though a Yorkshireman, he was absorbed by the strength of Scotland's relationship with the Spanish Civil War.
When I was a teenager, my favourite band was the Manic Street Preachers, and they had a song called "If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next." And I thought, what a bizarre song title. I'll follow that up and see what it's about, and managed to find that was a poster from the Spanish Civil War, which wasn't really a conflict I'd ever studied at school or anything. And the more I read about the Spanish Civil War, the more I thought, that really strikes a chord with me. The passion, obviously, the compassion, I suppose, in me, it just struck something. So from that song, I went backwards and backwards towards the Spanish Civil War, and it basically became a bit of an obsession, I suppose. In the privileged position of working in this library, I was able to then go through the letters that we have from brigaders sent back. So to have these incredible resources from different brigaders sent back from the time just set my mind on fire, really. To really have history on my hands, and it really is that, to be able to hold this letter here, written from Spain, from a trench on Hill 481, which is a hill outside Ibro before the Battle of the Ebro. I mean, that's something just really incredible that a book just simply could never give me.
Daniel's book is being launched in a Madrid bookshop. As well as the story of Caledonian adventure, he brings with him a taste of Scotland in the shape of malt whisky and shortbread. Visiting Spain will allow him to retrace the steps of the Scots he has written about. Daniel's journey begins in the Jarama Valley, south of Madrid.
It's a real honour to be in Spain. It feels like, in some ways, I've joined the circle and finally finished the journey, bringing the book here. 549 Scots fought in Spain during the Civil War, and a third of them are still here, sleeping under the Spanish soil they came to defend from fascism. Today, I stood looking down on the Jarama Valley and in the trenches where so many of these men were. In that place and others, they laughed, argued and shot and received bullets.
In February 1937, the newly formed British Battalion of the International Brigades had arrived at Jarama and been given the task of stemming a fascist advance on the Spanish capital. Over 100 Scots were involved in wading through the winter mud to wage war. Today, all in the Jarama Valley is peaceful and thistles grow proudly among the poppies, nature wildly and yet appropriately marking the area where 35 Scots fell. Local guide Sevi Montero is helping Daniel understand the surroundings Scots fought in at Jarama. Along with friends, Sevi was responsible for constructing this simple but beautiful monument to those that perished on the suitably nicknamed Suicide Hill.
The International Brigade didn't go to Spain to win a war. They went there as a political symbol of support from the people, the respective countries they arrived at, and also to act as a shock troop, act as shock troops. We were put into positions where we'd actually take the brunt of the battle temporarily, and then the rest of the Spanish army were coming behind that for to try and stabilise things like that. That's the idea behind it.
The Battle of Jarama was an almighty slog that set the fault lines for this most bloody of conflicts.
There were so many mistakes made at that time, you know. The slaughter was terrific in Jarama.
The ill-prepared and under-equipped British battalion was left dangerously exposed at Jarama. In the first week of fighting, their entire machine gun company was ambushed and captured by General Franco's Army of Africa, the Moors. Among them was Jimmy Maley, a Glaswegian volunteer who died in 2007 at the age of 99. Caught short, he took a toilet break in an olive grove.
Somebody came up with, it was like stewed apples, and sort of that big shank of ham you slice up all the time, you know. Chris and I does of that. But on the second day, everything was quiet, and we're there, and we heard not this time. We could hear the firing sort of over the side, at the back, and retreating all behind it all. And after eating all these apples, I needed to do what I needed to do, and I was out, went back to all the groves. I realised that the leaves were falling down the top, and I could hear the bullets. and the big leaves were falling down top of my head. Well, we couldn't go back. We couldn't go back. We just stuck there. Well, we kept that middle bit clear. They might have been going down each side of the distance, going back in, but that middle was blocked until they started to shell us in the third morning, and that was it.
Hitler sent over his Panzer Division and his Junkers 52 and his fighters, and the troops were coming over the Morocco Straits, and the fighting was absolutely horrendous at Jarama. And I think that was the worst moment of my whole time in Spain.
The men started to drop like 9 pins. Who firing a shot? Never saw the enemy. They were just dropping and running up. I would say that in the first 100 yards we run, there must have been about a fourth of the battalion dropped. Most of them had dropped and died. They were at my side, but you didn't know whether they were just falling down or you got to sleep with it. You didn't see a horrible death. Yes, it was just a natural. We had no time to bother about anybody dying or falling down. We had to get up there. I mean, any time for to stop and bother with somebody, even if it was your brother.
It was hilly country. Something like the Sidlaws outside Dundee, maybe like the hills round about here. You're either going up a hill or down a hill. And there were all these vines, the worst thing in the bloody world. When you were running, you were always running up against a vine and knocking hell out your shins and so like that. But it come out, they're shouting for stretcher bearers, and this lad now went across the number 1. And the first fella we picked up was a fella called Ralph Campo. He'd been secretary of the YCL in London, a big fellow, about 16 stone, wounded in the stomach. And we got him on the stretcher, and we're going down the hills. And how we got across this valley, I don't know, because it was being riddled, with the machine gun fire. And we eventually got him back, but he died, as a result of his wounds.
I mean, I didn't go there. I believe in violence. I mean, if you don't believe in violence, you don't go to war. The next thing was the Arabs on horseback were there and were surrounded. It was the Moors on horseback, I should say, surrounded. And they had done sabres, or whatever, sort of. No swords, but a sort of cleavers, and they were threatening to cut the private's office. And then they tied their hands behind my back by their own wire, and I didn't know what the hell they were saying. One punched me right in the chin, and I carry on. Actually, when we got captured first, we got lined up. And 2 of the men who were with us, the Sam Browns, Harold Fry and Dickinson. I don't know if they'd been in the regular army or not, but they pulled Dickinson out first. He was first in the line, and 2 Moors walked up, put the rifles to his, and it was like a man's brain opening up, just like somebody doing that. His brain, just like opening up a shutter. And the next man, somebody shouted, "Don't shoot, they're British, they're English." And he stopped, and we all got shot. Dickinson was just unlucky, he was first. There were 27 of us, and we put 9 in a cell. And it's a small cell, and the toilet was in a corner, and we come in, it was the one big plate for the 9 of us, with the hands. This is how we ate. And there was a South African Jew with us in the 9, in our cell. And the Moors came in one time with revolvers. And they were saying Moro, that means Moor. They thought he was a Moor, he was dark. And no, me no Moro. But they used to lie down at night time, the 8 of us with the around them, our heads. There was a big burly chap with our heads on his, like a dog with puppies. And the worst thing was the toilet in the corner. I finished up using my braces to wipe myself. That's right. There was no toilet there, there was a toilet in the corner, and you can imagine the hands. And that plate there for a week, and the 9 of us in the big plate eating. And it's surprising what you can eat. No matter, see, we had to eat, and it's very, imagine what you can do once you're in prison. The circumstances have all changed.
Despite the loss and capture of so many men, the battalion fought on and eventually played a key part in holding back Franco's forces.
To finally come here to the Jarama Valley is just something else for me, because I've read so much about this battle. I've read so many letters possibly written from these trenches, but to see the lie of the land in the place where Alex McDade wrote his song about this place really is just a different experience, and brings it a lot more home to me than pieces of paper ever really can. It's very, very beautiful countryside, so I dare say the Scots would have felt at home here. But yeah, it's really something.
Achieving a stalemate after debilitating and horrific early losses earned the Battle of Jarama legendary status among Scottish volunteers. This was typified by the newly written anthem, penned by Brigadier Alex McDade of Postle Park, Glasgow.
There's a valley in Spain called Jarama. It's the place that we all know so well. It was there that we
fought for our freedom. It's a place where our brave comrades fell.
Now we've left that dark valley of sorrow, and its memories we'll never forget. So before we continue this reunion, let us stand to our glorious dead.
In 1937, hundreds of idealistic Scots had just come face to face with Franco's fascists at the Battle of Jarama. Emboldened by the outcome of the battle, the British battalion's leaders planned an offensive at Brunetti, to the west of Madrid.
The first slogan up until July 1937 was "No passaran," and this meant "they shall not pass." So it meant it was a defensive war that we were fighting on our part. They shall not pass. But in July, things changed. The slogan now became "Pasaremos," we shall pass. The reason being, of course, that certain amount of arms and things were coming into Spain, and the Republican government at that time thought they had sufficient supplies in arms and that to be able to mount an offensive to try and relieve Madrid, which was under tremendous pressure.
In the baking July heat, optimism soon turned to terror. The British were slaughtered. Of 331 men present on the first day of battle, 289 were killed, wounded or captured by the last. Scots suffered more than most.
I think everybody would agree that Brunetti, we were all in fear of our life at that time. There was such a barrage put down. It was all open terrain. There was nowhere where you could take cover. And there was mortar fire, shell fire, tank fire, artillery, you name it, it was thrown at us. There was the Stukas were coming down, you know, they were shooting at us. There was Junkers, they were bombing us. And I think that was the worst time. It was absolute terror. I was lying in a ditch and the bullets from the planes were up and down the side of the road. And you just expected any time you'd had your number was up. It was a terrifying experience, very terrifying.
We were carrying ammunition to one of the guns from our ammunition dump along a straight communication trench, and we came under shell fire. And Bill Moses, a wee miner, I think, from Ayrshire, he got down, and he was in front of me. He got down on the ground, and and I got down behind him, and Black knelt beside my knees, and the shell came along and killed John Black, and this Frenchman was just behind him and took his head away. But that was a terrible moment, but the shock of it sort of dulled it.
The sergeant in my group here, Sergeant Black, I always remember him, Sergeant Black from Dover. He was chairman of the Dover Labour Party. Excuse me. He was a great friend of mine, and he got killed at Brunetti. And the comradeship was based on this. Your life depended on the man next to you, your friend next to you, and so forth. Yeah, right? And it couldn't be anything else but total trust between one another. We went to Spain, and I was a communist. Sergeant Black, he was a member of the Labour Party. And somebody else can be a member of no political party or anything else the case may be. But the one thing we had in common, we were anti-fascists. We're there to do a particular job, irrespective of what our political beliefs may be.
Since moving to a town near Brunetti, Ernesto Viñas has carried out painstaking research on the bloody battle which took part on his doorstep. He now helps people from Scotland and beyond understand what happened when their relatives fought here.
I know, and I try to research about the both armies. My particular political preferences, of course, are beside Republican fight, but I feel a lot of respect and curiosity for the world history. So I speak with anyone coming to me to know, and if I can help, I feel happy. Here there is a great problem that many, especially Republican soldiers, were dead and had to be abandoned in the battlefield. And when they finally retreat, many of the bodies remain lost there. There are something like maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people lost in the Republican Army. I think it's a speculation, because the land was finally in the Franco's army's hand, and they buried, or I don't know what they did with the bodies.
By the summer of 1937, the Scots who fought Franco were demoralised and had witnessed slaughter on an unimaginable scale. The great cause they had pledged themselves to was ridden with bleak reality. In Spain, their idealism had been severely tested. It would take an iron will for them to continue the fight. They had found hell.
War, I can only describe it as an emotional event. You forget about the bombs and the shells and all the rest of it. It's your emotion. You go past your own emotions. You get scared. Anybody who goes to war and says he's not scared is a liar. He's a fool. You get scared initially, but you conquer your fear to a limited extent. It's the emotional side of the war that always impressed me. Not the bombing and the guns, and the shells dropping and the bullets flying and that. These are things you expect in war. That's what war's all about. But it's the effect on the people that I was concerned with.
They were mostly communal burials, so nothing else one could do when you're over there. The dead were brought forward and they were placed out, and we dug the grave, of course, naturally, and I was among quite a few burial parties, and they were buried them then, and we always sang "The Lord's My Shepherd." All the men that were there, and there's very few that don't know the words of "The Lord's My Shepherd," and we sang that at any of the burials that I was present at, and I think it was 6 I was present at burials of that kind, and buried in communal graves.
I saw a young American bloke lying on a stretcher waiting for him for the ambulance to take him away, just round about the same position. And the poor bloke had been shot through from side to side by a burst of machine gun fire right through his chest and his stomach. And the bloke was just lying there writhing in agony, and my heart went out to the bloke. You know, I don't know who he was. I don't know whether he survived or not. I should think it'd be extremely unlikely. And I tried, you know, with all the power in my mind to try and give him some of my own strength. I mean, I was not a religious type, but I just felt that You know, it's about the only thing I could do for the bloke, and I thought that was the most poignant thing, really.
There's a kind of a hot, dusty Andalusian romance to it. You very quickly realise that it's not romantic at all. It's one of the most vicious wars, and then followed up by 40 years of vicious falangism under Franco. But I think there's still some of that romanticism is still there, and you know, the brigadistas, you know, these young men and women from Scotland, from my own country, who take this incredible journey. That has got its romance, even though what they found there quite often was death. Even though the battles were awful, there is still a kind of a camaraderie and a hopefulness. And I think finally it's about the hopefulness of the Spanish Civil War. Of course, it's a bitter hope because it was defeated. But it's still kind of there. There's still something in that fight that generation had, and those enormous issues they were fighting for, that still, I think, sing to us today. They still seem to us really interesting. They're still part of our lives today.
We continue to look through previously unseen, unique archive interviews with the men and women who joined the International Brigade in part 2 of The Scots Who Fought Franco, here on PBS America next.
"70 years ago, 500 young Scots risked their lives by volunteering to fight in another country's war. This remarkable group of men threw themselves headfirst into the bloody struggle against fascism. A third never returned. They were the Scots who fought Franco. The Spanish Civil War waged General Franco's alliance of military leaders, monarchists, conservatives, and most of the Catholic Church against a Republican government coalition of socialists, communists, and anarchists. Franco's side were bolstered by military assistance from Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy, while the Republican side received assistance from Stalin's Soviet Union. Additionally, 35,000 volunteers flooded into Spain to combat the threat of fascism. 549 of them were from Scotland. Through a series of interviews, gathered over a decade and never before seen, they continue their story.
You just need to say that you're an international brigadier. Here we are 60 years later, and if you meet somebody who's an international brigadier, there's John and myself too, a couple of old men, but you never forget the experience of having been together there, and there is a comradeship which knows no bounds.
The comradeship of the International Brigade, the battalion, the International Brigade, they were there from Cuba, America, Canada, Australia, Britain, Ireland, you name it, they're all there. And it was a comradeship with us all, and the comradeship of the Spanish people that will always live in my memory. I'll never forget it. Never forget the experience.
In the summer of 1937, the Scots who fought Franco had been severely tested in the fierce Battle of Brunetti near Madrid. Little did they know that worse was yet to come. Shortly after the slaughter of Brunetti, remaining volunteers and a wave of new recruits from Scotland were sent east to the region of Aragon. There, the British battalion began a mighty offensive towards the fascist-occupied town of Belchite, which they overran in early September after a spell of gruesome hand-to-hand combat. At the end of the Civil War, Belchite was kept as a historical monument. Daniel Gray, author of Homage to Caledonia, continues his journey across Spain with a walk through the ruined streets of this forgotten ghost town and finds memories of war spilling out from every crumbling building.
Everything that was horrific about the Spanish Civil War was epitomised by the battles in Belchite. I sat on the fountain in the square where dead bodies were piled up. A lot of the Scots gave accounts of the stench that was created by that, the summer heat combining with the bodies of not only humans but also animals in a huge pile in the middle. I stood there. I also saw the tower where Barney Shields, a Glasgow brigadier, stood defiantly when he'd been told to retreat and fired down on the fascists and was seen for the very last time firing from that tower. So all of these stories, suddenly it may look like a film set, it may feel like a film set, but they were very, very real things. And it's very powerful, so powerful and chilling to be in this arena.
It was at Belchite that Cumnock Brigadier George Gowans had a life-changing experience.
This was in Belchite, and it was there, it was door-to-door, hand-to-hand fighting. It was a very, very terrible battle there. And they were laying down bombardments right, left and centre. And at the top of Belchite there was a monastery, and the monastery was occupied by the Moors. Now, the Moors are the most ferocious fighters that ever came to Spain. They're terrible. And they had these big Gurkha knives and one thing and another. Well, we finally brought up the artillery and we managed to get them out. And when we entered this monastery, the nuns had all been raped and shot. And there was one or two still alive. And this one, Sister Katerina, we went over to try and help her. And she died in her arms, as a matter of fact. And she put this round my neck. And she said it would probably keep me safe. Well, I don't know. I seem to remember her in her dying moments. We buried her outside in the grounds, along with the rest of our party there. It was a communal grave and nothing else we could do. There's a burial party. And to me, it was a great significance. I think it was a wonderful gesture at the time, and I treasure it. I've kept a hold of it all these years, and I wouldn't part with it.
Faced with the brutal realities of war, Scots took their pleasures wherever they could. Despite unfamiliar food and customs, they built a strong rapport with the locals.
Life was good, you know, when the bullets and shells weren't flying around. A lot of the Spanish food I quite like, but we got fed things called garbanzos, which the lads called carabanches, but they're in fact what we call chickpeas, you see. But the British cooks didn't know how to cook these things, and they didn't know you had to soak them overnight, you see. So they used to cook them and they used to boil them up, and you used to get these things, and they were like bullets. They were like biting wee bullets. And we ate them because we bloody well had to eat them if we didn't want to starve. So, but the thing was this, that they caused tremendous wind problems later on in the day.
The people themselves were so kind and everything and that. You go down into the village and that, and they'd invite you into the house and that for to have a meal. And I think it was about once a week, or once a fortnight, they used to slaughter a pig. It was pigs. And they used to slaughter a pig. And this was divided up between the whole village and that. You know, it was communal in its sense, because everybody owned everything and that.
There was always a very good relationship. They seemed to think they were indebted to the men of the International Brigade. And they had great respect for us. We were welcomed into their home at any time. They would give us of their last, which was very little, I can assure you. And it was always a pleasure when we got out and rest and got to a village and we could come in contact with the young and the old and have a night with them where they do their best to give us something to eat or something, you know.
We used to, at night times, occasionally we used to have a sing-song, you know. There were quite a lot of Scotch lads there in number 2 company, I think in number 2 company. We always just sit around a big bath full of wine and ham and cheese. A slice of ham, slice of cheese, and you dipped your, as they come round the bath, you just fill your mug with wine, whatever it was they had. But just wait until sunset, and after that they were all to bed. Yeah.
And the people in the village were marvellous. They used to invite you into their homes, and we couldn't speak very much Spanish, and they used to go like this to you. Now, we didn't know what this little meant, but it means come in, you see. And we thought they were saying ta-ta, and we would sort of move away, and they would say no, no.
And this lad Alexander and I came to a winery, you know, where they were making wines, and we went and we were looking for beer, and we couldn't get beer. And the Spaniards brought out their wines, and they were extolling all the virtues of the different. So we tasted everything, you know. How we got back, I don't know. But the next morning, the whole host of drunks lined up.
There's something, and it may be imposed upon it since, but it's a nice thought anyway, something of the Scottish football support going over to Spain. There is a kind of a feeling that they liked their drink, and they were fun, and there was good crack. So I think that was there. It may be a bit romanticised over the years, but I think they were very open people. The men that went were we know them now. You've spoken to them. Were open, fun people who were interested in where they were going to. So they would have been extremely popular.
George Park was 12 when his father Alec, one of the older Scottish volunteers, went to Spain. He wrote home regularly describing the country he found.
I think the International Brigade has missed the cigarette smell. In fact, my father, in his letter, advises my mother to put, used to get 5 woodbine in a wee paper packet. Better to put 2 of these in a letter than anything else. Now, I don't know what like they were when they arrived. Probably they very carefully poured them out. And they had a bit of paper to roll a fag. In his letters, it says, in all sides, they get greeted with salud camarada. He didn't speak Spanish. But says, it's one thing we can meet, salud camarada, even the children.
Many of the comforts enjoyed by the volunteers were provided by Scotland's energetic Aid Spain movement. With the British government refusing to intervene in the Spanish Civil War, across the country, ordinary Scots hastily arranged aid organisations. Scotland rallied to the Republican cause with remarkable speed and commitment. The Scottish aid movement was characterised by a poverty-defying generosity above and beyond the call of duty.
Well, there was a massive humanitarian Aid Spain movement, which was carried on by communities, local organised groups, Spanish medical aid committees. Strangely, to an extent, the higher echelons of the trade union movement were very much engaged in the government's policy of non-intervention, and that means not touching it with a barge pole. And I know that certainly a number of trades councils and other union bodies had difficulties in working with aid organisations for Spain because the Communist Party was very involved, and at that time there were what was called the bans and prescriptions on involvement of communists within some of the trade union movement. But the whole movement took off. There was a huge, across the social scale, from the Fife miners right through to the Duchess of Atholl, from very sort of deep poverty, people going that extra mile to make contributions towards the Spanish people.
Every year, history teacher Paul Philippou lays flowers on the grave of James Moyer, a Perth man killed fighting in Spain. Whilst researching the role of Perthshire in the Spanish Civil War, Paul was struck by the Duchess of Athol's contribution.
The Duchess of Athol was the first female MP in Scotland, a Conservative MP, and by rights should possibly not have been a Republican supporter. But she travelled to Spain and saw, and what she saw so appalled her. She wrote a book called Searchlight of Spain, which sold over 30,000 copies, and she became an active supporter of the Republic and of democracy in Spain. And that obviously fell foul of her own party, who eventually hounded her out.
Athol defied her party's stance on the Civil War to spearhead a number of campaigns, becoming chair of the National Joint Committee for Spanish Relief. A conservative, working alongside left-wing groups, she was duly nicknamed the Red Duchess. The Aid Committee organised concerts, fiestas and film showings to raise both funds and awareness, and Flag Days for Spain became a regular feature of Scottish life. A large proportion of Aid for Spain work was carried out by working-class women, the volunteers of the Home Front. They were often inspired by the work of the Red Duchess, demonstrating the social breadth of the aid movement in Scotland. Scots commandeered prams to collect food from door to door, rattled tins on street corners, and energetically organised fundraising events.
My mother was very active. My father, in one letter, asked her to make sure that his union dues, his union cards, paid up. In another letter, he mentions one of the guys who went out with him, guy from Springburn, and would she go up and see his wife? So my mother was very much involved with looking after dependents and things like that. But what I always remember is that on a Saturday, we'd go up, we lived at the bottom of Fakin Street, Duke Street end. We'd go up to the top, to Cumbernauld Road, and the row of shops there, the biggest shop at that time was a cooperative. And we'd go up, we'd have, what every family had, the green baize table for playing cards. And we'd have it up for collections for Spain. And women come out to our shops would put a tin of condensed milk, tin of bully beef, tins of this and that, which was for Spain. Sometimes they put a couple of pennies in a wee bowl. And we did that every Saturday, my brother and I. The other thing is a food ship went from Spain, and the crew didn't take any wages.
To boost support for the cause, Aberdonian Bob Cooney sent home a Republican flag that had been draped around the bodies of 2 local brigaders slaughtered in Spain.
Bob Cooney had sent it back from Spain. It was used as the shroud for 2 Aberdonians who died in Spain, Archie Dewar and Tom Davidson. And Cooney, in his wisdom, and quite rightly so, decided to send that flag back to the Women's Aid Committee in Aberdeen, who then made a small banner down the side of it from the Aberdeen boys fighting in Spain. And they hung that on the walls in the halls around Aberdeen when they did their meetings to raise aid for Spain.
In Montrose, women were behind the creation of a centre for Basque refugee children exiled from Spain as the Luftwaffe's bombs began to fall on Guernica.
There were a whole range of fundraising activities, concerts, film shows put on around Dundee and the surrounding areas to raise money to keep the Basque children, to feed them. And 24 of them ended up at the Dundee Free Breakfast Missions Holiday Home, which was Mole Park House in Montrose, and 24 arrived there in September 1937. And 2 of them ended up staying after the war. They stayed in Dundee, married Dundonians, and the son of one of them, Tom Boland, was able to unveil a plaque at Mole Park House last October to commemorate the fact that his mother and another 24 Basque children stayed there for a couple of years, fleeing the bombing of the Basque homeland.
Resources were provided too for medical aid committees which supplied doctors and nurses for the hospitals of Spain. Most notable of these was Aberdeenshire-born Annie Murray, whose brothers Tom and George served in the international brigades. Annie worked as a nurse in Spain for almost the entire duration of the war. She provided an outstanding level of care in torrid conditions, even donating her own blood to patients. Predictably, Annie witnessed more horror in Spain than most. She wrote home to describe one particular incident close to Barcelona.
Italian aeroplanes had dropped pretty little cigarette and chocolate boxes with hand bombs neatly packed inside. The poor little mites of children picking up what they took to be the long-desired chocolate and quickly opening them were suddenly left handless, their faces burned beyond recognition. Nothing could surely be more brutal. What a bloody awful war this has been.
At Belchite, the Scots who fought Franco were unable to hold on for long. In February 1938, the fascists swept into the area and retook the town and neighbouring territory. They pushed the Republican forces into a retreat of 125 miles and back over the strategically crucial River Ebro. The Republican High Command responded with an audacious plan to send 80,000 troops, including the British battalion, back over the Ebro. In July, they began their crossing.
Fighting across the Ebro was pretty fierce at times, and it was there that the Germans were using the tactics of dive bombing the fortified positions, you know.
My number 2 on the gun, I was number 1, he was number 2. There's 7 in every machine gun. The other 5 are handing up ammunition and reloading the belts. And I thought at the time, my number 2 was called out right and I was wounded. And I thought at the time, I said, well, if I'm going to get it, I hope I get it the way he gets it. But I got wounded through the knee, and I was shipped from there up to Las Palmas Hospital above Barcelona to get the wound attended to. However, fortunately it wasn't a bad wound, and it wasn't long till I rejoined the battalion again. And it was in the second crossing of the Ebro, I got a piece of shrapnel in the head up here. I got this. So I was out of the game for a short time again.
The mass crossing of the Ebro was a monumental success. Emboldened, the British battalion pressed on to the Sierra Pandols, a mountain range in Catalonia. They fought bravely and incurred severe losses through several disastrous attempts at conquering individual summits, such as the infamous Hill 481. Alan Warren became an expert on the Spanish Civil War while living in Britain. He moved to Barcelona and conducts tours of battle sites.
This is the area where Hugh Mackay was, John Dunlop, Steve Fullerton, George Gowans and so many other Scots. What exactly were they here for? What were they trying to achieve?
Well, the 3 international brigades of the 35th Division had crossed over at Ascot and were trying to drive west to take Gandesa and then follow on and try and reunite with the rest of Republican Spain. But with such little supplies, they were rebuilding bridges, the bridges were being destroyed, very little supplies coming across. It was literally just people, machine guns, rifles, no heavy support, no mortars, and they were trying to get down Dessa as a modal point to try and move forward. But they were stopped here due to incredible firepower. Steve Fullerton was over on this side. It's a long, narrow ridge. You can barely walk across it. The British were on that side of the hill and the further side, and Steve Fullerton and his company were trying to attack on this side.
We were told to go over and attack this Hill 481, which was a terrible place. That it was so fortified that a fly couldn't have got in there without being found out. And anyway, it was more or less suicide going there to attack that, but we did. And most of our comrades in that particular attack were wounded or killed. And I felt that I was the only one that was still alive, because I'm looking around. I was helping others who had been wounded, bandaging them up and one thing and another. And eventually I was told, find a hole and hide there until it's dark, which I did. I found the hole, but just as I was getting in the hole, I got shot. Somebody was watching me. So that was me.
One thing I do remember is the smell. So I think there was some of the bodies must have been lying there for a day or two. They begin to smell, you know. So to put your sort of hanky over your, or whatever you had over your, maybe they were probably enemy. That was over the top, you know. But at this point, I didn't think as I looked over the top, no sign of the enemy at all, not a sign. No matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything at all. But as soon as I got over the top, my foot to that, the other side just opened up at once. So we all rushed it like an express train down. You can imagine just how fast we run down that hill. Actually, there were 3 of us together, running together. The centre chap shouted, "Oh, I've been hit, I've been hit." And the other chap says, "Keep running, you bastard, keep running." Bullets were simply whoosh. You could whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. You could feel the whoosh, whoosh. You could hear them, and you could actually feel the breeze as it passed there.
They call this place Death Valley because of the number of people who were killed trying to take Hill 481, but generally the whole area. Over in the horizon you can see about 20 or 30 windmills. The plan is to set up something like 250 windmills in a park eolic. And a lot of local people are getting very upset because some of the posters say 100,000 people died in this battle to defend Catalonia against fascism. And now they're destroying and digging up these bones to build these huge wind turbines.
Atop one of the highest mountains on which Scots fought is a monument dedicated to those who fell locally. The roll call includes the names of many Scots.
We've got 90 names here.
2 men from Alexandria alone, which is a very small place. Glenn and Lobban, surely friends.
And a lot of these, they don't know where they're buried, just under some pile of rocks here in Hill 666 and other places.
One name that was so nearly there is that of George Drever from Leith. His granddaughter, Kath Campbell, explains.
He was one of the few people, I think, in the country to have 2 death certificates. He went to Spain early in 1938, and after a couple of weeks' training was sent to the Aragon front. And in an offensive, when all of his comrades retreated, George and a couple of others decided mistakenly, as he admitted himself afterwards, not to retreat. Found themselves cut off and were subsequently captured a couple of days later by the fascists. The problem was that his other comrades assumed that they were missing, presumed dead in action, and this was relayed back to Edinburgh, to Leith, to my granny and granddad and George's friends and comrades at the time. And in fact, so much so that my granny my great granny got a death certificate for George and went along to the Peril Assurance Society and claimed £10 death insurance for him, which, needless to say, she didn't pay back when he turned up then some 9 or 10 months later back in Leith.
So this memorial was unveiled in May 2005 with Jack Jones, Sam Russell, Bob Doyle and Alan Menai Williams, and it commemorates the 90 British volunteers of the battalion who were killed in the Battle of the Ebro.
All these lost bodies somewhere in this valley.
George Park's father, Alec, fought alongside George Drever.
My father often attended conferences and that. So when he went, I suppose, I assumed that it was just to wait another conference. Then eventually my mother told us he'd gone to Spain. So I must say I was immensely proud of him, because, as I said, I went round collecting all the signatures of the returning international brigaders. Oh, my old man, it's an idea. It was great. But at the same time, I also realised he was in danger. And when we got the word first that he was missing, well,
a cause for concern. And one day, when I came home from school, my mother says to me, George, Dad won't be coming home. You're now the man of the family. Christ, I was 12 years old. Dear George and Eric, in the last letter I wrote to Mum, I said I would write the next one to you and have chosen today, Sunday, as I have much leisure time, and I hope to tell you at the moment I am sitting on my bed, and directly below, I am one stair up, there is the infant school, which I mentioned before, where the kiddies sing No Passaran, Internationale, and a song about the International Brigade. The wee girls are also... Since I have come here, I have never seen a sweetie, so we'll know especially what the children here have. Some have great red bows in their heads. Well, fellas, I have no more to write just now, so we'll keep close hoping that you, George, have made progress with your violin. I could do fine with you here, Eric, to sew on buttons. I suppose you will be going up to see your grandpa and grandma. Hope you're all well. Your dad's best love. Salute, camaradas.
Must have made you feel very proud.
Yeah.
At the end of August 1938, the Scots who fought Franco were holding firm in Catalonian mountains. They remained deeply committed to the cause, despite monstrous conditions and heavy losses. Yet their fate was set not in battle, but in the corridors of power. In late September, the Republican government announced the withdrawal of the international brigades. They believed that the move would force Hitler and Mussolini to remove their troops from Spain. It was a forlorn hope. Surviving Scots marched through the streets of Barcelona as part of an emotional farewell parade. Hundreds of thousands of Catalans lined the streets to salute the heroes of the international brigades. The great Republican leader, La Pasionaria, paid tribute to their efforts, telling them, "You can go with pride. You are history. You are legend. We will not forget you."
And you women of Spain, tell your children, tell them of the international brigades. Tell them how from across the seas and the mountains these men came to our lands. You gave up all to come here and to tell us your cause, the cause of Spain, is ours also. Many of them, thousands of them, remain here, and their shroud is the soil of Spain.
The Spanish Republic the Scots had set out to defend was eventually defeated in the spring of 1939. The fascists marched victorious into Madrid, and Franco established a dictatorship that lasted for 36 years.
I came back with the main British contingent, in beginning of December 1938, and we got a tremendous reception at Victoria Station in London, and then we went. Then after a day or two, the Scots went up in a contingent. We went up in a bus, I think, up to Glasgow, where we were. There was a reception for us in the City Hall in Glasgow, and there was a tremendous reception there.
Throughout his life, George Gowans faced questions about his time in Spain.
They're all interested in why did you go and what did you do? And it's a strange thing that nowadays, when you've been through 2 world wars, nobody asks you what you done in the last World War. They always ask you what you done in Spain. Spain has come prominent in history compared to what it did in these times. But the thing is that I wasn't long back from Spain till the Second World War started. So there wasn't much time of communication between anybody now. And nowadays, if you're asked to go to speak at a burnt supper or anything like that, The first thing that comes up is Spain. They tell me you're in Spain. What did you do?
Though the sacrifices of international brigaders are not recognised on official war memorials, across the country, ordinary Scots have erected monuments and many more are in the offing. Scotland is refusing to forget. John Tadden, John McClanders, Malcolm Smith, Andrew Finnan, Ken Stalker, Dave Sampson, John Ness,
John Black,
William
John Moody,
Tom Davis,
Tom Buck,
Pat Curley,
Archie
Davies, John Gill, Charlie McLeod,
James
Murray,
Ken
Rees,
James
Carroll,
Alex
McShane,
John
Rowe,
Adam
Davies, William Meredith.
I've seen people reduced to tears, remembering friends who died, Scottish friends who died, Spanish friends who died. And I know of, there are some people who don't like to talk about it at all, and their families say that they very seldom talked about it afterwards because of the horrors that they saw and the incredible, incredible courage they must have had to face every day. So there must have been a turning point somewhere between the great hope. And that in itself is almost like a microcosm of the war itself. The great hope of the middle of the 20th century of the world could be a much better, more egalitarian, more just place. And then you suddenly see, the whites of Franco's troops' eyes or the Nazi troops in the later war. But I still think they brought away with them a sense of hope. Okay, we were defeated in that one. And it was hell for Spain particularly. But the very fact that so many people spontaneously rose up, made their own way to Spain, small groups of people, is in itself a fantastic source of hope.
The democracy Scottish volunteers fought to protect in Spain was not restored until after Franco's death in 1975. In contrast to Scotland, there was a desire in Spain to forget the Civil War. Journalist Sid Lowe discovered the reasons behind this when he moved to Madrid to cover Spanish football for the Guardian newspaper.
One of the key factors in the transition from post-Francoism and his regime into a democratic regime, which they have now, was a collective pact of silence, a collective pact of forgetting. And it was very consciously, let's not talk about the past as a way of moving on to the future. Culturally, I think psychologically, emotionally and socially, Spain is still a country that's marked by what happened, not just between 1936 and 1939, but of course for the next 40 years under a Franco dictatorship.
Journalist and author Giles Tremlett describes the impact of this silence on daily life.
One of the things we've discovered from this whole process is that Spaniards don't still agree on what happened during the Civil War. They don't agree on the interpretation of the Civil War. They don't agree about how good or bad Franco was. They don't even agree about what the Republic was like, whether it was good or bad. And so all those old wounds, if you want, which had been silenced during Franco's years and then sort of kept under the carpet during the first years of democracy, well, all those things have reappeared. When I've gone to speak to people in villages, I found that often you can be talking to someone perfectly normally in the street about what happened during the Civil War, and then suddenly a neighbour will walk by and that they'll either shut up completely or start whispering to you, simply because they don't want that neighbour to hear what they're saying, because that neighbour was almost certainly on the other side of the Civil War. His family was on the other side of the Civil War, and there's blood between them. Some people say there were two sides to the Civil War. Another theory is that actually there were 2,000 sides to the Civil War, that each village was divided in two, and that actually what really hurts in Spain is the fact that the killings were done in each village by other people from that village, and that after the bloodbath was over, everybody had to keep on living together, and that was the real problem.
The end of the Pact of Silence has allowed many developments in Spain. The efforts of Emilio Silva have perhaps been the greatest vehicle for change. What began for Emilio as a search for his grandfather's remains has turned into a countrywide quest to dig up mass graves of Republican victims. as he explains.
10 years ago, I left my job in a magazine to write a book about my grandfather. He was a political militant during the Second Republic. He was killed by the Phalangists in 1936. And then I went to the area in the northwest of Spain where he lives. And I started to talk with old people about the Civil War and the years after the Civil War. And then I found a man, a communist militant, who said, "I know the place of the grave of your grandfather." And some months later, with a group of archaeologists and forensic doctors, we opened the mass grave. I identified my grandfather with a DNA test, and I put his bones with my grandmother.
Now Spaniards are digging in their thousands to find their own relatives' remains. But it is not only in Spain that these excavations are impacting. Retired fireman Alan Craig from Drumchapel was a toddler when his father, also Alan, was killed at the Battle of Jarama.
He was taken to a field hospital in Tarragona, where he died 5 days later. He was then given a decent burial in the cemetery just next to the hospital. But after the war, the fascists moved in and desecrated all the graves. Now the people who were the Republicans, they were, along with my father, they were all tuffed over this wall at the cemetery into a refuse pit. Oh, I was actually horrified at first because, you know, I thought, wait a minute, this is not a way to treat a dead person, no matter whose side you're on, you know.
Until recently, Alan had never even seen a photograph of his father.
I wrote again to the Friends of the International Brigade, and they told me to get in touch with the Marxist Museum, our library in London. And they said to me, yes, we've got a photograph of your father. And I said, well, is there any chance of purchasing a copy? They said, certainly, £20. So I said, it's a bargain, you know. But when the photograph came in a big envelope, I thought, I don't know what to expect, you know. And the strange thing was, as soon as I opened up, I knew right away which one was my father. I was so delighted, very humble. My daughter even, she was in tears. That was it's quite a very humbling experience.
Alan is determined to use Spain's newfound openness to locate and rebury the body of his dad.
Okay, so this is us playing a game, the fascists.
Like Alan, the relatives of those who fought in Spain still live with the war's legacy. John Dunlop's son Norman has redesigned a war game featuring some of the locations in which his father fought.
I've just used it as a kind of tool to learn about the war because I didn't really understand my dad's experience of it very well, but because the game has given me a focus around which to sort of organise knowledge about the war, then it's, you know, matched up my interest in wargaming and computers with my dad's life experience. One of the things I would say about him is that the media is interested in him as the interesting thing that he did in media terms, which is going and fighting in Spain. But to me, he was a great dad. And that is the most important thing about him to me. Now, that he fought in Spain is a good thing. It's a heroic thing that he did. And I think, you know, to me, he was sort of my hero, even as an adult.
Willie Maley is a professor at Glasgow University. With his brother John, he wrote a play about their father Jimmy's imprisonment in Spain. The ideals that led Jimmy into joining the international brigades influenced his everyday life.
We didn't have to worry about raids under the bed. We had a raid tucking us into bed at night. I think it did affect us. I mean, my father was teetotal. He never drank, never smoked. There was 9 pints of milk in the bath because we didn't have a fridge. There was 9 pints of milk in the bath. He was on the side of the underdog. That's one thing that's true about him. But no, he wasn't he was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. But I would say he wasn't necessarily a dogmatist. He had his dogmas, you know, and he had his very strong views. By God, he had his strong views, you know what I mean? And I think that's a good thing. We lived in a street where it's a true story. There were people sometimes out without shoes, and my father would come up and get a pair of shoes and give them it. Now, because we had nothing, we didn't always like the idea of my father going down and giving things to other people. But there was always, you always knew there were people poorer than you, because you could look out the window and see them.
You know, when I was about 5, I always remember a guy stopping me as I was going into our stair, and he said, "Your father's a dirty communist." And I went, "Oh no, he's a clean one." You know.
Jenny Renton runs a bookshop in Edinburgh. She has lived with the legacy of her father Don's time in Spain.
I think I am proud of him. Very proud of him, really. I admired his courage hugely. He had a beautiful smile and a great warmth. What I would have liked would be able to remember my childhood and remember playing a game with him.
Though they could not defeat Franco, the Scots that went to Spain had squared up to fascism before the rest of the world got around to it. Scotland can be proud of them.
We are very, 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 very grateful for these people, because for me it's the most solidarity of one people is take his life to fight for the freedom in another country.
I can't quote it word for word, but it goes, "For evil to succeed, it only takes good men to do nothing." And these were good men, and they did something. And I think it's an example that we can take today to make sure that evil doesn't succeed.
No, I don't regret going, no. I'm quite pleased I went. I mean, I thought it was something that should have been done, you know.
Oh, it's one of the greatest experiences of my life. It's the highlight of my life, apart from being married and having my family.
I'm only sorry we lost.
It was, I think, probably the most inspiring moment of my life.